In the autumn of 1957, a pilot climbed into the cockpit of a plane that didn't officially exist. His mission? Photograph a place that wasn't supposed to be there. At 70,000 feet, cruising above the clouds, his camera captured something the Soviet Union had hidden from the world. One photograph, one mistake, one secret that changed everything. The year was 1956. The Cold War was freezing over. America and the Soviet Union circled each other like wolves, each desperate to know what the other was hiding. Nuclear weapons were being built in secret. Missile programs expanded in the shadows, and neither side could afford to be blind. But there was a problem. The Soviet Union was a fortress, closed borders, no journalists, no diplomats allowed beyond Moscow. The heart of the country was a black box, and inside that box, the Soviets were building something. President Eisenhower needed eyes in the sky, so the CIA built the U-2, a spy plane unlike anything the world had ever seen. It could fly higher than any fighter jet, higher than Soviet radar could reach. At least, that's what they believed. The U-2 was painted black. Its wings stretched 90 feet across, fragile as a glider, and its cameras could photograph an entire city from 13 miles up. The first flights began in the summer of 1956. American pilots crossed into Soviet airspace, their planes invisible to the world below. For months, it worked. But the Soviets knew something was wrong. They called them blackbirds. Soviet radar operators watched helpless as mysterious contacts appeared on their screens, too high to intercept. Fighter jets scrambled, roaring into the sky, but they couldn't reach the intruder. The U-2 floated above them, untouchable. The Kremlin was furious. Their airspace had been violated. Their secrets were being stolen. But they couldn't admit it. To admit the Americans were flying over the Soviet Union with impunity would be to admit weakness. So they stayed silent, and the flights continued. By 1957, the CIA had a target list: military installations, nuclear facilities, submarine bases along the Arctic coast. Each mission brought back thousands of photographs, analyzed frame by frame in windowless rooms at CIA headquarters. But there was one location that puzzled American intelligence. Deep in the Ural Mountains, in the closed city of Chelyabinsk, something was happening. Reports from defectors mentioned a secret facility, a place where the Soviets were processing uranium and plutonium for their nuclear arsenal. The CIA called it Chelyabinsk 40. On maps, it didn't exist. Eisenhower approved the mission. On a cold morning in October, a U-2 took off from a secret base in Pakistan. The pilot's orders were clear: fly north into Soviet territory, photograph the Chelyabinsk region, and return. 8 hours of flight time, most of it over enemy territory. The plane climbed through thin air, engines screaming, until the sky turned black above and the earth became a distant curve below. At 70,000 feet, the cameras activated. Click, click, click. Miles of Soviet landscape captured on film. Forests, rivers, roads that led to nowhere. And then the cameras found it. A sprawling industrial complex hidden in the wilderness, cooling towers, processing plants, railway lines snaking through the snow. This was no ordinary factory. This was Mayak, the Soviet Union's first and most secretive plutonium production facility, the beating heart of their nuclear weapons program. But there was something else in those photographs, something the CIA analysts didn't expect. Around the complex, the land was scarred. Dead zones where nothing grew. Lakes that reflected an unnatural color in the black and white images. And nearby, entire villages had been erased from existence. The analysts leaned closer. What had happened here? The truth would take decades to emerge, but that single U-2 photograph had captured evidence of one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. an event the Soviet Union had hidden from the world. In September 1957, just weeks before the U-2 flight, a storage tank containing radioactive waste had exploded at Mayak. The blast released a cloud of radiation across hundreds of square miles. Dozens died immediately. Thousands more were evacuated, their homes bulldozed, their towns wiped from official maps. The Soviet government said nothing. No warning to the outside world. No acknowledgement that anything had happened. But the U-2 had seen it. The photograph showed the aftermath of a catastrophe the Kremlin thought it had concealed. The dead zones, the contaminated land, the ghost towns. For the CIA, this was gold. Proof that the Soviet nuclear program was not only massive, but dangerous, even to the Soviets themselves. For Eisenhower, it was a moral dilemma. He now possessed intelligence about a nuclear disaster that had affected tens of thousands of civilians. But to reveal it would be to admit that American spy planes were violating Soviet airspace. It would expose the U-2 program. It might even trigger an international crisis. So the photograph stayed secret, locked in a vault, classified, unseen by the public for more than 30 years. The U-2 flights continued, mission after mission, deeper into Soviet territory. The Kremlin seethed, but remained powerless. Until May 1st, 1960. A U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down near Sverdlovsk. The Soviets had finally figured out how to reach the Black Birds. Powers survived and was captured. The secret was out. Eisenhower was forced to admit the truth. Yes, America had been flying spy planes over the Soviet Union. Yes, for years. The U-2 program became front-page news around the world. But even then, the photograph of Mayak stayed hidden. It wasn't until 1989 that the Soviet Union finally admitted what happened at Mayak. The explosion, the radiation, the evacuations. For 32 years, it had been a state secret. The contaminated zone around the facility remains off-limits to this day. The U-2 photograph that captured the disaster was declassified in the 1990s, long after the Cold War ended. By then, it was a historical footnote, a curiosity in the archives. But think about what it represents. One plane, one mission, one photograph that revealed a catastrophe a superpower had tried to erase. The pilots who flew the U-2 never knew what their cameras captured. They saw only clouds and earth from 13 miles up. The analysts who studied the images couldn't have known they were looking at the scene of a nuclear accident. And yet the camera saw what human eyes could not. In the Cold War, knowledge was power, and ignorance was a weapon. Both sides built walls of secrecy, hiding their mistakes, their failures, their crimes. But sometimes the secrets slip through. Sometimes a photograph survives. The U-2 flew for decades after that autumn day in 1957. It's still flying today, in fact, upgraded, modernized, still watching from the edge of space. But that single image of Mayak remains one of the most important photographs of the Cold War, not because it revealed a weapon, but because it revealed a truth. That even in the shadows, even behind walls of steel and silence, nothing stays hidden forever. The camera doesn't lie, and history doesn't forget.